The breakout of 3 inmates from the famous prison in 1962 has been the subject of wild speculation for more than half a century.
They vanished without a trace. The case went unsolved for decades, buried in rumors and dead ends. 3 men, 1 impossible escape, and a trail that went cold. But now, the truth is out, and it's disturbing. Join us as we delve into a shocking discovery that finally answers the Alcatraz escape mystery. The mystery. The escape from Alcatraz Federal Prison was thought to be impossible. It was known as the hardest prison in the country, housing some of the most notorious criminals like Al Capone, Mickey Cohen, Machine Gun Kelly, and Whitey Bulger. However, on June 11, 1962, bank robbers Frank Morris, John Anglin, and his brother Clarence Anglin waited until just after the last bed check at 9 p.m. to make their bold escape. They created dummy heads from plaster and paper to fool the guards and squeeze through holes they had carved in their cell walls using sharpened spoons and homemade chisels. They found their way into a utility corridor behind the cells, climbed up to the top of the cell block using protruding pipes, and eventually made it to the roof. From there, they shimmied down to the ground, where they inflated life vests in a raft made from prison raincoats. Investigators think they entered the water just before midnight, and after that, they were never seen or heard from again. The only federal lawman still working on the case, trying to track down the escapees, is Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke. He manages the Oakland office of the U.S. Marshals Service and has many cases to handle. Dyke remarked that he gave them a lot of credit. All the work they did, it was months of work without getting caught. He acknowledged that what they did was wrong, but he understands why people are fascinated by the mystery of what really happened that night over 54 years ago to Morris and the Anglin brothers. Dyke stated that they managed to do what no one else had accomplished and completely escape the island without being found, if they survived. Dyke mentions that he is still pursuing several leads in the case, but he doesn't invest much time or money into it. The Marshals Service took over the Alcatraz escape investigation from the FBI back in 1979. Some investigators think that the escapees drowned in the bay that night and never reached freedom, but there is no solid evidence to confirm this. Now, the family of John and Clarence Anglin claims that a photograph taken in 1975 shows the brothers alive and well in Brazil. An old family friend presented the photograph to the Anglin family in the 1990s. Fred Brizzi told the family he encountered the Anglin brothers at a bar in Brazil where they were living and working on a farm they had bought. Brizzi was quite a character who knew the 2 escapees from their childhood in Florida. Now deceased, Brizzi was a pilot who ended up in prison for smuggling substance from Latin America to Florida. However, before he passed away, Brizzi shared the photograph with the Anglin family, and a photo analysis expert believes it is likely a picture of John and Clarence Anglin. The age and condition of the photo, along with the fact that the men are wearing sunglasses, make it hard for experts to reach a definite conclusion. Dyke claims Brizzi was a con man, and an expert working for the U.S. Marshals Service doubts the authenticity of the photograph. Dyke states that measurements of the Anglin brothers' physical features suggest it is not them in the Brazil photo, but he also admits that it's challenging to make a definitive conclusion and completely dismiss it as a valid lead. He continues to look into the Brazil photo as a potential lead in the case, despite his skepticism about Brizzi in the image. However, Dyke had another lead in the case he was trying to solve. A deathbed confession had come to light. According to those who have seen and read the full document, the deathbed confession was given to a nurse by a man on his deathbed who wanted to admit his involvement in the escape from Alcatraz. The man revealed to his nurse that he and an accomplice assisted Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers in their escape from Alcatraz. The confession suggests that the 2 men were waiting in a boat on the bay near Alcatraz the night of the escape, and they picked up the 3 convicts from the water and took them away. The confession was very detailed, stating that the men painted the boat white just days before they set out to help with the prison break. Robert Cecchi, an off-duty San Francisco policeman, was sitting in his car just before midnight at Marina Green that night. He was looking out at the bay when he spotted what he described as a pristine white boat. Cecchi felt something was off because the boat had no lights on. He didn't see anyone on the boat and there was no sound coming from it. After watching the boat closely for several minutes, Cecchi noticed a light turned on. He said someone on the boat was shining a spotlight or flashlight into the dark waters of the bay. He said that it just didn't seem right. Cecchi said he thought it was really strange. It started moving out and the port and starboard lights came on. He couldn't tell if it went north or south, it just vanished into the darkness. The next day, when Chechi learned about the escape from Alcatraz, he went to work and filed a report about what he had witnessed. The FBI interrogated Chechi for days, and sometimes the questioning became quite intense. Chechi has never shared his story on TV before, but he told an investigative reporter how the FBI agents repeatedly asked him what he saw, where the boat was, and what time it was. They even asked him why he didn't swim out to check the boat. Chechi remembers one FBI agent saying they should bury it and let it go away. Michael Esslinger is probably the leading expert on Alcatraz and the 1962 escape. He has been studying it for over 30 years. His interest in Alcatraz began when he was just 11 years old during a tour of the island. As an author and historian, he had written 2 books on the subject and was currently working on a third. When he was asked about the deathbed confession and what Robert Chechi witnessed, he replied that he didn't know what the witness saw. He couldn't say if the boat he saw was connected to the escape, but he didn't think the witness was lying. He was a beat cop. He was a professional witness. He recognized that something was off. Now, many years later, the deathbed confession implies that what Chechi observed might have been the boat that assisted the convicts in their escape. Now retired, Chechi believes that the men who broke out of Alcatraz were indeed on that boat. Esslinger mentions that another fascinating aspect of the deathbed confession is what transpired after the men on the boat allegedly assisted the 3 convicts in escaping from the water to freedom. The confession implies that the boat's crew transported the escapees all the way to a location near Seattle. Shortly after their escape, the accomplices reportedly betrayed the Anglins and Frank Morris. According to the confession, the dying man revealed to his nurse that he was involved in the unaliving the convicts and helped bury their remains close to a highway. Esslinger has ventured into the area to search for the bodies alongside a former federal investigator. Although they did not locate the bodies, they have not entirely abandoned the deathbed confession. Esslinger referred to the 1962 Alcatraz escape as one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century. He expressed that he would really like to uncover the truth. For every piece of evidence suggesting these guys perished, there's an equally compelling piece indicating they survived. Deputy U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke remarked that the case can sometimes be frustrating, stating that there's no closure. There's no definitive way to determine what actually occurred. Now that we've examined the mystery and the evidence, let's take a closer look at the escape that shook the nation. The Alcatraz prison escape. On the night of June 11, 1962, inmates Frank Morris and brothers Clarence and John Anglin broke out of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, a high-security prison situated on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay, California, United States. In the years that followed, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and local law enforcement chased down hundreds of leads, but no solid proof has ever come to light about what happened to the 3 men. In 1979, the FBI officially determined, based on circumstantial evidence and a majority of expert opinions, that the 3 men likely drowned in the icy waters of San Francisco Bay while trying to swim to the mainland. The U.S. Marshals Service still has the case file open and active, and Morris, along with the Anglin brothers, are still on their wanted list. New circumstantial and material evidence has continued to appear, sparking fresh discussions about the fate of the 3 inmates. Many theories of varying degrees of credibility have been suggested by authorities, reporters, family members, and amateur enthusiasts. The 4 inmates were all familiar with each other from their past times in prisons in Florida and Georgia. When they got placed in neighboring cells in December 1961, they started to come up with a plan to escape, led by Morris. Over the next 6 months, they expanded the ventilation ducts under their sinks using old saw blades they found around the prison, metal spoons from the cafeteria, and a makeshift electric drill made from a vacuum cleaner motor. They hid their work with painted cardboard and covered the noise with Morris's accordion, blending it with the sounds of music hour. Once the holes were big enough to crawl through, the men accessed the unguarded utility corridor right behind their cell tier and climbed up to the empty top level of the cell block, where they created a secret workshop. Using over 50 raincoats along with other stolen and donated materials, they made life preservers based on a design Morris discovered in an article. Morris also found other ideas in magazines. They also put together a 6-by-14-foot rubber raft, carefully stitching the seams by hand and sealing them with liquid plastic from the shops, using heat from nearby steam pipes. They made paddles from plywood and screws. In the end, they climbed up a ventilation shaft to the roof and took out the rivets that were holding a large fan in place. The men hid their absence while they worked outside their cells, and after they escaped by making fake heads from a homemade mixture that looked like paper mache, which included soap, toothpaste, concrete dust, and toilet paper. They made the heads look real by painting them with paint from the maintenance shop and using hair collected from the barbershop floor. They piled towels and clothes under the blankets in their bunks and placed the dummy heads on the pillows, making it seem like they were sleeping. On the night of June 11, 1962, with everything ready, the men started their plan. West found out that the cement he had used to fix the crumbling concrete around his vent had dried, making the opening smaller and securing the grill in place. By the time he got the grill off and made the hole bigger again, the others had already left without him. He went back to his cell and went to sleep. From the service corridor, Morris and the Anglins climbed up the ventilation shaft to the roof. The guards heard a loud crash when they broke out of the shaft, but nothing else was heard, and they didn't check what caused the noise. Carrying their gear, they slid down a kitchen vent pipe, dropping 50 feet to the ground, and then climbed over two 12-foot barbed wire fences. At the northeast shoreline, close to the power plant, a blind spot in the prison's searchlight and gun tower system, they inflated their raft using a concertina that they had stolen from another inmate and modified to work as a bellows. Investigators estimated that sometime after 10 p.m., they got on the raft, launched it, and headed towards their goal, Angel Island, which was 2 miles to the north. The escape wasn't found out until the morning of June 12 because of the clever dummy head trick. For the next 10 days, various military and law enforcement agencies carried out a thorough search by air, sea, and land. On June 14, a Coast Guard cutter discovered a paddle drifting about 200 yards from the southern shore of Angel Island. On that same day in the same area, workers on another boat came across a wallet wrapped in plastic that contained names, addresses, and photos of the Anglin's friends and family. On June 21, pieces of raincoat material, thought to be parts of the raft, were found on a beach close to the Golden Gate Bridge. The next day, a prison boat retrieved a deflated life jacket made from the same material, located 50 yards off Alcatraz Island. According to the final FBI report, no other physical evidence was discovered. FBI agents initially believed that the men had drowned. They pointed out that the individuals' personal effects were the only belongings they had, and the men would have drowned before leaving them behind. However, no human remains were located at that time. On July 17, a month after the escape, a Norwegian ship, the SS Norefjell, spotted a body floating in the ocean 15 nautical miles from the Golden Gate Bridge. The ship did not recover the body and only reported the sighting in October. San Francisco County Coroner Henry Turkle expressed skepticism about the idea that it could have been one of the escapees, stressing that it was unlikely for a body to still be floating on the ocean's surface after more than a month. Instead, Turkle suggested that the body might have belonged to Cecil Philip Herman, a 34-year-old unemployed baker who had jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge 5 days prior. Several coroners from nearby counties disputed Turkle's view, claiming that it was possible the remains were from one of the escapees. FBI investigators stated their official stance that, while it was theoretically feasible for the men to have made it to Angel Island, the chances of them surviving the rough currents and cold waters of the bay were very slim. According to the final FBI report, West mentioned that they had intended to steal clothes and a car once they reached land, but no such thefts were reported in the nearby area. West was the only conspirator who did not take part in the actual escape. He cooperated fully with the investigation and, as a result, was not charged for his involvement. After Alcatraz was closed in 1963, West was moved to McNeil Island, Washington, and then back to Atlanta Penitentiary. After completing his sentence, along with 2 more sentences in Georgia and Florida, he was released in 1967, only to be arrested again in Florida the next year for grand larceny. While at Florida State Prison, he fatally stabbed another inmate in October 1972. He was serving multiple sentences, including life for the murder conviction, when he passed away from acute peritonitis in 1978. On December 16, 1962, an inmate named John Paul Scott at Alcatraz created inflatable armbands using inflated rubber gloves and swam 2.7 nautical miles from Alcatraz to Fort Point, located at the southern end of the Golden Gate Bridge. He was discovered there by some teenagers suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. After he recovered at Letterman Army Hospital, he was sent back to Alcatraz. Scott is the only known case of an Alcatraz inmate successfully swimming to shore. Nowadays, athletes swim the same route from Alcatraz to Fort Point during 2 annual triathlon events. Due to the high operating costs of Alcatraz compared to other prisons, almost $10 per prisoner daily compared to $3 per prisoner daily at Atlanta, and the fact that 50 years of saltwater exposure had badly damaged the buildings, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered the prison to close on the 21st of March, 1963. The FBI concluded its investigation on December 31, 1979, after 17 years. Their official conclusion was that the prisoners likely drowned in the cold bay waters while trying to reach Angel Island. They pointed to the remains of the raft and the personal belongings of the men as proof that the raft fell apart and sank, leading to the 3 convicts succumbing to hypothermia, with their bodies carried out to sea by the swift currents of San Francisco Bay. The FBI passed their findings to the United States Marshal Service, which still has an open investigation. Deputy U.S. Marshal Michael Dyke mentioned to NPR that there's an active warrant, and the Marshal Service doesn't stop searching for people. In 2009, Dyke noted that he continued to receive tips regularly. The warrant will expire in 2030, when the missing men would be at least 100 years old. In 2022, the Marshal Service released age-progressed images of the missing men on their Fugitive Investigations website. Even with mounting evidence and new revelations, Trump's comments brought fresh skepticism and a new wave of debate over what really happened on Alcatraz Island. Let's find out more. Trump debunks Alcatraz escape. Trump made his announcement after a reporter asked him during a press conference where Washington, D.C. was named the host for the 2027 NFL Draft, how he came to the decision to reopen Alcatraz, which last saw a prisoner leave in 1963. He described the prison as something that was both horrible and beautiful and strong and miserable weak. President Trump mentioned to reporters in the Oval Office that he aims to reopen Alcatraz prison as a representation of law and order. He stated that it has many interesting qualities. However, he dismissed the idea that anyone had ever escaped, only noting that one person almost made it, and they found his clothes pretty badly torn. He added that there were a lot of shark bites, a lot of issues. John Martini, a historian who has studied Alcatraz for over 50 years, said he had never heard of anyone's clothing being torn by shark bites. For many years, the story surrounding the prison has been that man-eating sharks in San Francisco Bay would have made it impossible for an inmate to survive a swim from the island. Martini explained that, in truth, the sharks found in the bay are not great whites and are not known to attack humans, even those swimming at aquatic park. It's not like the sharks are circling the island waiting to eat convicts. He further explained that man-eaters are a myth that developed during the prison era, and from what he had learned, the correctional officers did nothing to discourage the inmates from believing it. At least one brave inmate in 1962, 35-year-old John Paul Scott, demonstrated that a person could swim from Alcatraz to the mainland and make it with almost no injuries or being detected. Historians and officials from the Bureau of Prisons have argued about what constitutes a truly successful escape from Alcatraz, whether it is simply getting out of one's cell, making it into the water, reaching land, or getting to land and avoiding capture. The first 2 of the 5 men who were never accounted for, Theodore Cole, 25, and Ralph Rowe, 32, escaped from Alcatraz on December 16, 1937. Officials stated that the convicted kidnapper and bank robber had been planning their escape for months by gradually sawing through iron bars in the prison's mat shop. They allegedly made their getaway using 2 large airtight oil cans that they tied together to form a raft. Civilian clothes, which they intended to change into upon reaching land, were reportedly sealed inside one of the cans, according to the Chronicle. 4 years after their escape, a Chronicle article claimed that the fugitives were living comfortably in hideouts in South America. Over the years following their escape, they were reportedly seen in various locations around the Bay Area, Colorado, Missouri, and Oklahoma, as reported by the Chronicle, before they were allegedly smuggled out of the country by a friend. Martini stated that, however, the simplest explanation is that all the evidence recovered from the bay suggests they drowned. In contrast to the reported sightings, federal officials believe the men likely passed in the turbulent waters of the bay. Nevertheless, they insisted that the search for the men would continue until they are found unalived or alive. On June 11, 1962, 6 months prior to Scott and Parker's escape attempt, 3 bank robbers, Frank Lee Morris, along with brothers John and Clarence Anglin, successfully escaped from Alcatraz. Over several months, they carefully used spoons sharpened to a point to chip away at the concrete walls of their cell blocks. During that time, the trio also managed to secretly climb to the tops of their cell blocks to loosen the rivets on a 5-foot section of a ventilator that they would eventually squeeze through. On the night of their daring escape, they pushed through openings in the utility alleyway between the cell blocks, climbed up drain pipes, slid down 50-foot kitchen vents, and scaled 2 12-foot fences topped with barbed wire, all while avoiding a number of guards in the dark. The men reportedly created water wings from materials they had stolen from the prison's supplies. The guards discovered they were missing the next morning when, instead of finding sleeping bodies, they encountered heads made of plaster with painted faces and brush bristles that looked like hair. Pillows under the blankets were arranged to mimic the shape of their bodies. Throughout his years of researching Alcatraz, Martini mentioned that he asked many inmates about their thoughts on the fate of the men who escaped in 1962. A lot of them believed that, by their standards, the men had indeed escaped, even if they had drowned. Martini explained that to them. It was about getting out of the prison, getting off the island, and that was freedom. It didn't matter how long it lasted or if they passed on trying. For that moment, they were free men. Regardless of what Trump believes, one thing is certain: Alcatraz was no ordinary prison. Let's uncover what life was really like behind those cold concrete walls. Alcatraz Prison. Alcatraz was a high-security federal prison located on Alcatraz Island, which is 1 mile away from the coast of San Francisco, California, in the United States. This location has been a fort since the 1850s, and the main prison structure was constructed between 1910 and 1912 as a military prison for the U.S. Army. On October 12, 1933, the United States Department of Justice took control of the United States Disciplinary Barracks Pacific Branch, located on Alcatraz. The island was modified and turned into a prison for the Federal Bureau of Prisons in August 1934, after updating the buildings and enhancing security. Due to its high security and its position in the chilly waters and strong currents of San Francisco Bay, prison officials thought Alcatraz was escape-proof and the most secure prison in America. The cell house was 3 stories tall and included 4 main cell blocks along with the warden's office, a visitation room, a library, and a barbershop. The prison cells were usually 9 feet by 5 feet and 7 feet high. These cells were basic and offered little privacy. They contained a bed, a desk, a wash basin, a toilet on the back wall, and just a few items like a blanket. Black inmates were separated from the others. D Block was home to the most dangerous inmates, and at the end of this block were 6 cells known as the Hole. Inmates with behavioral issues were often sent there for harsh punishment. The dining hall and kitchen were connected to the main building, where prisoners and staff shared 3 meals a day. Above the dining hall was the Alcatraz Hospital. The prison corridors were named after famous streets in the U.S., like Broadway and Michigan Avenue from New York City and Chicago, respectively. Working at the prison was seen as a privilege for inmates. Those who earned this privilege worked in the Model Industries Building and New Industries Building during the day, helping the military with tasks like sewing and woodworking, as well as doing various maintenance and laundry jobs. The prison shut down in 1963, but Alcatraz opened again as a public museum. From 1969 to 1971, American Indians occupied the island and the prison. It is one of the top tourist spots in San Francisco, drawing around 1.5 million visitors each year. Now managed by the National Park Service's Golden Gate National Recreation Area, the old prison is currently being restored and preserved. When the Bureau of Prisons set up the federal penitentiary on the 1st of January 1934, they took steps to enhance the security of the prison cells, aiming to make Alcatraz escape-proof and to improve living conditions for their staff. They incorporated modern technologies to boost security and comfort in the buildings. Guard towers were constructed outside at 4 key locations. The cells were redesigned and equipped with tool-proof steel cell fronts and locking devices controlled from control boxes, and the windows were reinforced with iron grills. Electromagnetic metal detectors were installed at the entrances of the dining hall and workshops, along with remote-controlled tear gas canisters placed strategically. And gun galleries with machine gun-armed guards were set up to patrol the corridors. Upgrades were also made to the toilet and electrical systems. Old tunnels were filled with concrete to prevent prisoners from hiding or escaping, and significant changes were made to the housing facilities for guards, wardens, and captains, allowing them to live with their families, with the quality of accommodations depending on their rank. Warden Johnston, U.S. Attorney General Homer Cummings, and Sanford Bates, the first director of the Bureau of Prisons, worked closely together to create a legendary prison that fit the era, leading to Alcatraz Island Federal Penitentiary being dubbed Uncle Sam's Devil's Island. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.